It was the moment the waiter quietly slid a black leather check presenter onto the table that I realized something was terribly wrong. I still remember the exact expression on his face. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't confusion. It was pity. He looked at me, then at the 12 members of my family sitting around the private dining room, and lowered his voice. "Whenever you're ready, sir." I smiled politely, assuming he had simply handed it to the wrong person. "I think that's for my brother." The waiter didn't move. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "Your family instructed us to place the bill with you." My stomach tightened. I opened the folder. $4,083.76. For a second, I genuinely thought there had been a mistake. Then I looked around the room. No one seemed surprised. Not my older brother Daniel, who was busy cracking open another lobster claw. Not my mother, who suddenly became fascinated by the centerpiece. Not my father, who wouldn't even meet my eyes. Even my aunt quietly reached for another bite of butter-soaked lobster tail, as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel finally leaned back in his chair with the same smug grin I'd seen my entire life. "Come on, Ethan." He shrugged. "You've got it." The room fell silent, and that's when I realized this hadn't happened by accident. They had planned it. Growing up, my family had one rule, or at least, one rule that only seemed to apply to me. If you're the responsible one, you help everyone else. It sounded noble, generous, loving. In reality, it became an excuse for everyone around me to take advantage of me. Daniel was 3 years older than I was. He was charming, funny, the kind of guy who could convince strangers to buy him drinks. Teachers loved him. Neighbors adored him. He somehow escaped responsibility every single time. If he forgot someone's birthday, they know how busy Daniel is. If he wrecked Dad's truck, accidents happen. If he borrowed money, he'll pay it back eventually. Spoiler alert, he never did. Meanwhile, if I forgot to call Mom before working late, I was selfish. If I refused to lend Daniel another $1,000, I didn't care about family. By the time I turned 36, I'd stopped arguing. It never changed anything. Instead, I built my own life quietly. I became a commercial electrician. Not glamorous, not flashy, but steady. Long hours, early mornings. Good pay, because I specialized in industrial projects that most electricians didn't want. I wasn't rich. Far from it. But I was careful with money. Every overtime shift, every weekend emergency call, every skip vacation. It all went toward one goal: buying my own house. I'd finally done it 8 months earlier. A modest 3-bedroom place outside Portland. Nothing extravagant. But every nail, every wall, every payment was mine. That should have been the happiest year of my life. Instead, it somehow convinced my family that I'd become their personal bank. The lobster dinner was supposed to celebrate my parents' 40th anniversary. Mom insisted everyone come. "It's important," she said over the phone. "We haven't all been together in forever." I almost declined. I'd been working 12 straight days on a hospital expansion project. I was exhausted, but Mom pulled out the guilt she perfected over decades. It would mean everything to your father. So I went. The restaurant overlooked the river. Huge windows, white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where every server seemed to glide instead of walk. The private dining room had already been reserved. Daniel arrived nearly 40 minutes late. As usual, he walked in laughing, wearing designer sunglasses even though the sun had already set. Behind him came his wife, Melissa, carrying expensive shopping bags. Mom immediately stood up. "There they are!" Like celebrities had arrived. Dad hugged Daniel. Melissa kissed everyone. No one mentioned they were late. No one ever did. Daniel threw an arm around my shoulders. "Ethan, my favorite little brother." I smiled politely. "Only brother." He laughed. "Details." Then he looked around the room. "Let's celebrate properly tonight." That sentence should have warned me. Dinner started normally enough. Wine arrived, then appetizers, then another bottle, then another. Daniel ordered without looking at prices. Oysters, the seafood tower, extra king crab. Mom nodded enthusiastically. Melissa added champagne. My aunt wanted lobster bisque. Someone suggested surf and turf. Daniel waved toward the waiter. "Actually, bring everyone lobster." The waiter hesitated. "The whole lobster?" Daniel smiled. "The biggest ones you've got." Everyone laughed. Except me. I quietly asked for grilled salmon. Daniel looked offended. Come on. It's a celebration. I'm fine. He leaned closer. Live a little. I almost changed my order just to avoid the conversation. Instead, I smiled. I'm good. He shrugged dramatically. Suit yourself. The meal continued. Stories. Old memories. Laughter. But something felt off. Every time another bottle of wine arrived, Daniel nodded approvingly. Every time desserts were suggested, he encouraged everyone. Get whatever you want. At one point, Melissa ordered a bottle of wine I'd only ever seen locked behind glass displays. The waiter mentioned the price. Nearly $900. Daniel didn't blink. Perfect. Dad chuckled. Only the best tonight. Still, nobody mentioned who was paying. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I passed the hostess stand. That's when I heard Daniel's voice. Yeah, just give it to my brother. I froze. The hostess looked uncertain. Are you sure? Daniel laughed. He knows. I stepped back before they saw me. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about something else. I wanted to believe that. I really did. When I returned to the table, Daniel raised a champagne glass. There he is. The conversation continued, but I couldn't shake what I'd heard. Dessert somehow turned into another course. Chocolate souffle, imported cheeses, special reserve whiskey, espresso flights, every single suggestion. Daniel approved. I noticed Mom watching me. Not smiling. Watching. Like she was waiting. Waiting for something. Then the waiter disappeared. A few minutes later, he returned with the check. Straight to me. Exactly as Daniel had instructed. I looked at the total again. $4,083.76. My voice came out surprisingly calm. I think there's been a mistake. Daniel leaned back. No mistake. Mom finally spoke. You make the most money. I blinked. What? Dad cleared his throat. You've always been financially responsible. Melissa smiled sweetly. And this dinner was really your idea. My idea? She nodded confidently. You said we should do something special. I said we should have dinner. Daniel laughed. Same thing. I stared at him. You ordered most of the menu. So you pay for it. His smile faded. Don't start being cheap. The word hit me harder than I expected. Cheap. Because I didn't want to spend $4,000 on food I hadn't ordered. Mom sighed dramatically. I knew this would happen. What would happen? You'd embarrass us. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I embarrass you? Daniel crossed his arms. Everyone's waiting. The waiter stood frozen beside the table. Other servers had started glancing into the room. Melissa whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. It's honestly sad how money changes people. Money changes people. I had spent years quietly helping them. I paid Daniel's rent when he lost his job. Twice. I covered Dad's medical deductible. I replaced Mom's broken furnace. I loaned Melissa money for a temporary emergency that somehow became permanent. Not $1 had ever come back. And somehow, I was the selfish one. I looked around the table one more time. Every single face expected me to give in. Just like always. But something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. I closed the check presenter. Set it gently on the table. Looked directly at the waiter. Then at my family. And for the first time in my life, I said the one word they never expected to hear from me. No. The word hung in the room like someone had shattered a glass. No. Not loud. Not angry. Just firm. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The waiter glanced nervously between me and my family, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Daniel was the first to laugh. Not because he thought it was funny. Because he genuinely believed I was joking. Good one. He reached toward the check. Seriously, hand over your card. I didn't move. I'm not paying. His smile disappeared. What do you mean you're not paying? I mean exactly what I said. Mom leaned forward. Ethan. She used the voice she'd used when I was 12 years old and had forgotten to take the trash out. Don't make a scene. I looked around the private dining room. Crystal glasses. Empty lobster shells stacked like tiny mountains. Half-finished bottles of expensive wine. A dessert cart still sitting in the corner. A scene. I asked quietly. You've spent over $4,000 expecting me to cover it without asking me first. Dad rubbed his temples. Son! No, Dad! I cut him off before he could finish. When exactly was I supposed to find out? Daniel rolled his eyes. When the bill came. You mean right now? He shrugged. Yeah, like that answered everything. Like ambushing someone with a $4,000 bill was completely normal. The waiter finally cleared his throat. Would anyone else like the check? Daniel pointed at me without even looking. He's got it. I don't. The waiter hesitated. I'm sorry. I ordered salmon. 1 iced tea. That's it. The poor guy looked trapped. I'll give you all a few minutes. He picked up the folder and walked away almost fast enough to jog. The second he left, Daniel leaned across the table. What the hell are you doing? I'm refusing to be used. His jaw tightened. Used? You invited us. I was invited. Mom immediately jumped in. It was a family dinner. Exactly. So why am I apparently funding everyone else's celebration? Nobody answered. Because there wasn't a good answer. Melissa broke the silence. You know. She crossed her arms. This isn't really about money. I looked at her. No. It's about generosity. I almost smiled. Interesting. She frowned. What does that mean? It means generosity is something you choose. I pointed toward the empty lobster platter. It's not something people force on you. Daniel slapped his hand on the table. Enough. A few heads turned outside the dining room. He lowered his voice. You're humiliating Mom and Dad. No. I said calmly. You did that. Mom suddenly sniffled. Then another. I recognized those sounds immediately. She was about to cry. It had worked my entire childhood. If she cried, everyone blamed me. Sure enough, tears appeared. I don't understand. She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Why you've become so cold. I stared at her. Cold. I remembered replacing her furnace in the middle of January. I remembered taking unpaid days off work to drive Dad to doctor's appointments. I remembered missing vacations because someone always needed help. Cold. That was a new one. I've helped this family my entire adult life. Nobody disagreed. Because they couldn't. I've never asked for repayment. Still silence. I've never kept score. Daniel scoffed. Oh, you're definitely keeping score now. I looked him straight in the eye. No. I'm finally stopping the game. Dad finally spoke. His voice was quieter than everyone else's. Son, if money's tight. I laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. It's not about whether I can afford it. Then what's the problem? The problem is respect. That word landed differently. Even Dad looked uncomfortable. You all decided I'd pay. Nobody asked. Nobody warned me. Nobody even thanked me in advance. Because none of you thought you had to. Daniel leaned back. We're family. Exactly. Family helps each other. I nodded. They do. So help. I have. For years. I won't anymore. The waiter returned. He looked terrified. I'm very sorry. But management does need payment. Daniel smiled confidently. There. He pointed at me again. The waiter looked at me. I slowly shook my head. I'll pay for my meal. Silence. And only my meal. The waiter's eyes widened slightly. I don't know if we can split a private event bill. I'd like to speak with your manager then. Daniel actually laughed. You're unbelievable. No. I replied. I'm done. 5 minutes later the restaurant manager arrived. A woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. Professional. Calm. She introduced herself politely. I understand there's been some confusion. I explained exactly what had happened. No exaggeration. No emotion. Just facts. I ordered 1 entree. I never agreed to host. I was never informed I'd be paying. She listened carefully, then turned toward my family. Is that correct? Nobody answered immediately. Daniel finally shrugged. We assumed. The manager blinked. You assumed. He makes good money. She looked genuinely confused. I'm afraid that's not how restaurant billing works. Daniel frowned. We reserved the room. Under whose name? Mom quietly answered. Mine. The manager nodded. And who placed the food orders? Daniel raised his hand. Mostly me. And the wine. Also me. She smiled politely. then I'm afraid responsibility rests with the reservation holder and those who authorize the orders. The room became incredibly quiet. Melissa's face lost color. Mom looked panicked. Dad suddenly became fascinated with his empty coffee cup. Daniel stared at the manager. Seriously, I'm very sorry. She remained perfectly composed. But we cannot legally require another guest to pay simply because relatives expect him to. I had never been so grateful to hear the word legally. Daniel stood up, so suddenly his chair scraped across the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. The manager remained calm. I understand this is stressful. No, you don't. He pointed at me. He's loaded. I couldn't believe he actually said that. The manager looked at me, then back at him. That doesn't change the situation. Daniel laughed bitterly. So what? You're taking his side? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm following restaurant policy. Then came the first crack in Daniel's confidence. He reached for his wallet, opened it, closed it. Melissa looked away. Dad sighed heavily. Mom whispered, I thought Ethan would just... She stopped. The manager heard enough. So, she said gently, this was always the expectation. Nobody spoke. She looked at me. I apologize, sir. That simple apology hit me harder than I'd expected. Someone, anyone, had finally admitted this wasn't normal. I paid my own bill. $87, including tax and tip. The waiter thanked me quietly. I stood, picked up my jacket, and headed toward the door. Behind me I heard Daniel. You're just leaving? I turned. Yes. You can't seriously leave us with this. I didn't bring you here. Mom's voice cracked. Ethan, if you walk out... I waited. She never finished. Maybe because she realized she had no leverage left. Maybe because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of disappointing her. I hope you figure it out. Then I walked away. The cool night air felt different. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for years without realizing how much it weighed. I reached my truck, started the engine, sat there for nearly 2 minutes. Not driving, just breathing. Then my phone buzzed. Daniel. Ignored. Buzz. Mom. Ignored. Buzz. Melissa. Ignored. By the time I reached the highway, I had 14 missed calls, 23 text messages. The family group chat exploded. Mom, I cannot believe you embarrassed us. Daniel, you're unbelievable. Melissa, hope you're happy. Aunt Carol, families don't do this to each other. That last message almost made me laugh. Families don't do this to each other? Exactly. When I got home, I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. For the first time all evening, the house was quiet. No accusations. No guilt. No pressure. Just silence. Then my phone rang again. This time it was my cousin Ryan, the only person in the family who had barely spoken during dinner. I answered. Hey. His voice was hesitant. You okay? I think so. There was a pause. I wanted to tell you something. What? I wasn't supposed to say anything. A knot formed in my stomach. What are you talking about? Ryan exhaled slowly. They planned this. I closed my eyes. I figured. No. You don't understand. They talked about it weeks ago. My grip tightened around the phone. What? I heard Daniel joking that if everyone ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, you'd complain for 5 minutes, then pull out your credit card like always. My heart sank. It wasn't spontaneous. No. Ryan sounded ashamed. They actually laughed about it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to process what I was hearing. Ryan continued quietly. And Ethan, there's something else. What? They weren't celebrating your parents' anniversary. I frowned. What do you mean? The anniversary was just the excuse. A chill ran through me. The real reason they picked that restaurant was because Daniel knew it would be expensive enough that you'd never say no. I didn't answer, because at that moment, one painful realization settled over me. The $4,000 dinner had never been the real betrayal. It had simply been the first time I caught them in the act. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry. Anger eventually burns itself out. What kept me awake was something worse. I was replaying memories. Hundreds of them. Tiny moments I'd never questioned before. Daniel forgetting his wallet every time we went out. Mom calling only when something in the house broke. Dad asking if I could spot Daniel a little cash because he's under a lot of pressure. Christmas gifts I'd bought for everyone while receiving a coffee mug from the gas station. Every memory looked different now, like someone had finally turned on the lights. At 6:30 the next morning, I was already on a construction site. Our crew was wiring the final floor of a new medical office building. Normally, work helped me forget everything else. Not that day. I was pulling cable through a conduit when my foreman, Mike, walked over. Mike was in his late 50s. Big guy, gray beard, rarely talked unless he had something worth saying. "You look terrible." "Thanks. You fighting with somebody?" "My family." He nodded once. "Those are usually the hardest fights." I laughed without humor. "You have no idea." He leaned against a steel beam. "My father used to borrow money from me." I looked at him. "Every month." I finally told him no. "What happened?" "He didn't speak to me for almost 2 years." I frowned. "Did you regret it?" Mike smiled. "No. Because when he finally called, he asked how I was, not what I could do for him." Then he walked away. That conversation stayed with me all day. Around lunchtime my phone buzzed again. 37 missed calls. 52 text messages. Voicemails. Even Facebook messages. I ignored all of them. Until one notification caught my attention. "Ryan sent you an attachment." It was an audio file. Just over 3 minutes long. I stared at it. Then called him. "What's this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I shouldn't have recorded it. Recorded what? The planning meeting. I felt my stomach drop. What planning meeting? The barbecue at Aunt Carol's house. The one 3 weeks ago. I accidentally left my phone recording after I was testing the microphone. I sat down on an unfinished staircase. "You have audio?" "Yeah. You need to hear it." I put in my earbuds. Press play. For the first few seconds, all I heard was background chatter. Dishes. Laughter. Someone opening a soda. Then Daniel's voice. Clear as day. "Relax. He'll pay." Mom laughed. "I almost feel bad." Daniel answered immediately. "No, you don't." Everyone chuckled. Melissa spoke next. "We should go somewhere really nice. If Ethan's buying, I'm getting Lobster." More laughter. Then Aunt Carol. "Don't tell him ahead of time. He'll try to get out of it." Daniel laughed again. "No. We hand him the bill. He'll complain. Then fold." Dad finally spoke. His voice was hesitant. "Maybe we should ask first." There was silence. Then Daniel answered. "If we ask, he'll say no. So don't ask." Another round of laughter. Then Mom. "You know he hates disappointing people." Daniel replied with the sentence that made my blood run cold. "Exactly. We're not paying for dinner. We're using guilt." The recording ended. I just sat there, unable to move, unable to breathe. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was hearing them discuss me like I wasn't even a person. Like I was a tool. A credit card with feelings they could manipulate. That evening, Daniel finally stopped calling. Instead, he showed up at my house. I was changing the oil in my truck when I heard tires crunch across the driveway. His black SUV parked behind me. He climbed out wearing expensive sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Like always, he acted as if he owned the place. "You gonna ignore me forever?" I kept working. "I've been busy." "You embarrass Mom." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." I stood up, wiped my hands on a rag. "No. You embarrass Mom. You made reservations. You ordered thousands of dollars in food. You expected me to pay." Daniel sighed dramatically. "Can we stop pretending this is about money?" I couldn't believe he still didn't understand. "I have proof." His expression changed. "What proof?" I watched his confidence flicker. "Ryan sent me the recording." Color drained from his face. "What recording?" "The barbecue." Silence. "The one where all of you planned this." He looked away for the first time in his life. Then he laughed. "It was a joke." "A joke?" "Yeah. You know how people talk." "So you didn't mean it?" He hesitated. "You take everything too seriously." I stepped closer. "You said, we're using guilt." He swallowed. You laughed when Mom admitted she'd feel bad. You admitted you knew I'd say no if you asked." His voice hardened. "So what?" There it was. The mask slipping. "So what? You've always had more than us." I stared at him. "I worked for everything I own. So did I. I couldn't stop myself from laughing. You've had 6 jobs in 10 years. You quit everyone. You borrowed money from everyone. You've never paid anyone back. His jaw clenched. That's not the point. It is exactly the point. Then he said something I never expected. You think you're better than us. The words surprised me, because they sounded genuine, like he'd convinced himself they were true. I've never thought that. You bought a house. I worked overtime for 8 years. You bought a new truck. My old one died. You always have money. Because I save it. He shook his head. No. Because you're selfish. That word again. Selfish. I finally understood why they kept using it. If they convinced themselves I was selfish, then taking from me wasn't wrong. It was justice. I want the recording. Daniel held out his hand. I smiled. No. You don't need it. I already deleted it. That was a lie. I don't believe you. You don't have to. He took another step toward me. I mean it, Ethan. I looked him directly in the eye. So do I. For a second I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he got back in his SUV. Before closing the door, he looked at me one last time. This isn't over. Then he drove away. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning I walked into work. Something immediately fell off. People kept looking at me, whispering. One of the apprentices stopped talking the second I approached. Mike walked over. You okay? I think so. He frowned. You've seen Facebook? No. He handed me his phone. There it was. A public post from Melissa. It already had hundreds of comments. It's heartbreaking when someone values money more than family. We tried to celebrate 2 wonderful parents, but one greedy person abandoned his own mother with a restaurant bill. Some people forget where they came from. No names. But everyone who knew us knew exactly who she meant. The comments were brutal. Money changes people. Poor parents. What kind of son does that? Hope they cut him out of the will. Then I saw something worse. Pictures. Photos from the dinner. But only carefully chosen ones. One showed my mother crying. Another showed me standing up to leave. None showed the mountain of lobster. None showed Daniel ordering bottles of wine. None showed the manager explaining restaurant policy. Just enough to make me look heartless. I handed the phone back. They're lying. I figured. Mike folded his arms. So what are you going to do? I looked across the construction site. Workers moving steel. Forklifts backing up. The steady rhythm of people simply doing their jobs. Then I remembered the recording. 3 minutes. 3 devastating minutes. I smiled for the first time since the dinner. I'm done defending myself. Mike raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means, I think it's time everyone heard the whole conversation. That afternoon, I got another call from Ryan. His voice sounded nervous. Ethan, you need to know something. What now? I was at Grandma's house. Mom and Daniel were there. What did they say? They're not finished. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Ryan took a deep breath. They're telling everyone you stole money from Grandpa before he died. I froze. What? I know it's a lie, but they're spreading it. I felt the blood drain from my face. Because Grandpa had been the one person in the family who always believed in me. And now they were willing to destroy even his memory, just to punish me for refusing to pay one restaurant bill. For a long time after Ryan hung up, I just sat in my truck outside the job site with both hands gripping the steering wheel. They weren't trying to get their dinner paid for anymore. They were trying to destroy me. There was a huge difference. One was about money. The other was about making sure I never dared tell them no again. I finally started the engine and drove somewhere I hadn't been in almost a year. Grandpa's house, or what used to be Grandpa's house. It sat on 5 quiet acres about 40 minutes outside Portland. My uncle had been preparing it for sale ever since Grandpa passed away 18 months earlier. The place looked exactly the way I remembered. The old red barn, the white porch swing, the maple tree Grandpa planted when my mother was a little girl. I parked and just stared at it. Grandpa had taught me how to change the oil in a truck in that driveway. He taught me how to frame a wall inside that barn. And more importantly, he taught me something I had forgotten over the years. Never confuse kindness with surrender, Ethan. At 12 years old, I hadn't understood what he meant. At 36, I finally did. As I climbed the porch steps, I saw my Uncle Steve carrying boxes toward a pickup truck. He smiled when he recognized me. "Ethan, I was wondering when you'd stop by." We hugged. He stepped back and looked me over. "You look exhausted." "I feel worse." He nodded toward the porch. "Coffee." I hadn't planned on staying. Instead, 2 hours disappeared. I told him everything. The dinner, the recording, the Facebook posts, the lie about Grandpa. He never interrupted. When I finally finished, he let out a slow breath. "I hoped your grandfather was wrong." "What do you mean?" Uncle Steve stood and disappeared into the hallway. A minute later, he returned carrying an old metal lockbox. I'd seen it before. Grandpa kept important papers in it. Steve unlocked it and placed a thick envelope on the table. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this." I frowned. "When?" "A week before he died." My heart started racing. "Why didn't you?" "Because he told me only if something happened that proved you needed it." He looked me in the eye. "I think this qualifies." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. Grandpa's handwriting hadn't changed in 50 years. Strong, straight, deliberate. I recognized it instantly. The first line made my throat tighten. "If you're reading this, then I'm probably gone, and your family has finally pushed you too far." I stopped, looked at Uncle Steve. "You've read this?" He nodded once. "Only after he passed." I kept reading. Grandpa wrote that he'd watched the family dynamic for years. He knew Daniel manipulated people. He knew my mother constantly expected me to sacrifice because I rarely argued. He even apologized. I should have spoken up sooner. Then came a sentence I'll never forget. "The strongest mule on the farm always carries the heaviest load until it finally collapses. Don't become the mule." I wiped my eyes before finishing the letter. Near the end, Grandpa wrote something else. Something that explained everything. "The day you stop letting people use you, they'll accuse you of changing. You haven't changed. Their access to you has." I folded the letter carefully. For the first time in days, I didn't feel guilty. I felt understood. As I was putting the letter back into the envelope, Uncle Steve cleared his throat. "There's something else." He slid a thin folder across the table. Grandpa kept records. I opened it. Loan records. Every time Grandpa had loaned money to someone in the family. Every amount, every date, every repayment, or lack of repayment. Daniel's name appeared again, and again, and again. Car repairs, credit cards, rent, business ideas, vacation deposits. The total made me blink. $186,000. Over 15 years. Paid back. Less than $4,000. My mother wasn't much better. Neither was Aunt Carol. Grandpa had quietly supported half the family while they complained that he played favorites. "He never told anybody," Uncle Steve said. "He didn't want people fighting over money." I stared at the pages. "They'll never believe this." Steve smiled. "Oh, I think they will." He reached into the folder again. "There are signed promissory notes." My jaw dropped. Daniel had actually signed them. Grandpa had simply never enforced them. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. "Family reunion, Sunday, Grandma's house. Organized by Mom." I laughed. Of course. They wanted an audience. I almost declined. Then I thought about Grandpa's letter. I typed one word. "I'll be there." Sunday afternoon felt strangely calm. Almost peaceful. As I pulled into Grandma's driveway, I counted 9 cars. The whole family was there, waiting. Daniel stood with his arms crossed. Melissa beside him. Mom looked furious. Dad looked tired. Aunt Carol wouldn't even look at me. The moment I stepped out of my truck, Mom started. "So, you finally decided to show up." I said I would. She folded her arms. "After everything you've done." I didn't answer. Instead, I looked around. "You wanted everyone here?" "Yes." "Perfect." That caught Daniel off guard. We gathered in the living room. Nobody offered me a seat, so I stayed standing. Mom took a deep breath. "We're here because this family deserves an apology." I nodded. "They do." She smiled. "I knew you'd." I interrupted. "From all of you." Her smile disappeared. Daniel laughed. "Still playing the victim?" "No." I reached into my backpack. "I'm done being one." First, I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker sitting on Grandma's bookshelf. Daniel frowned. "What are you doing?" "You'll see." I pressed play. The room filled with familiar voices. "Relax. He'll pay." Mom's laugh. Melissa talking about Lobster. Daniel saying, "We're using guilt." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Mom looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at the floor. Finally, Melissa whispered, "Who recorded that?" I ignored the question. Instead, I pulled out Grandpa's letter. I found something else. I read it aloud, every word, every sentence. By the time I reached, "Their access to you has..." My mother was crying. Real tears this time. Not the kind she'd used to manipulate people. The kind that come when someone realizes they've been seen clearly. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. He wrote that because Ethan manipulated him. That was his mistake." I smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Then I placed Grandpa's loan ledger on the coffee table, followed by every signed promissory note. Uncle Steve stepped forward. "I've already had copies made." The color drained from Daniel's face. Mom looked horrified. Dad whispered, "Oh my God." Uncle Steve wasn't smiling anymore. Dad didn't play favorites. He protected all of you. And Ethan was the only one who never asked him for money. The room exploded. Aunt Carol started crying. Melissa demanded to know why she'd never heard about the loans. Daniel shouted that none of it mattered because Grandpa had forgiven him. Steve answered calmly, "Did he? He never said that." Then Dad did something I'd waited my entire life to see. He stood, turned toward Daniel, and said, "No more." The room fell silent. Dad looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen him. "I've spent years making excuses for you." His voice shook. "I blamed Ethan because it was easier." Mom reached for his arm. He gently pulled away. "No, we're done pretending." He looked at me. "I'm sorry." 2 simple words, but they carried 30 years of weight. I believed him. Daniel looked around the room, waiting for someone to defend him. Nobody did. For the first time in his life, he stood alone. He grabbed his keys. "This family is unbelievable." I almost laughed. He pointed at me. "You think you won?" I answered honestly. This was never about winning. It was about finally telling the truth. He slammed the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. Melissa hesitated, then quietly followed him. The weeks that followed were quieter than I'd expected. The Facebook posts disappeared. Some relatives called to apologize. Others never contacted me again. I was okay with both. Mom started therapy. Dad invited me to breakfast. Just the 2 of us. For the first time in years, we talked instead of arguing. Real conversations. Not requests. Not guilt. Just father and son. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. About a month later, Ryan came over with pizza. We sat on my back deck, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. "You know." He smiled. "I've never seen you this relaxed." I laughed. "I haven't either." He looked toward my garage. "You fixing up the old truck?" "Yeah. Want to know something funny?" "What?" "I can actually afford the parts now." He laughed. "What changed?" I looked at him. I stopped paying for everyone else's life. 6 months later, I finally took the vacation I'd postponed for nearly a decade. I drove the Pacific Coast Highway with no schedule, no phone calls demanding money, no emergencies that somehow became my responsibility. One evening, I parked at an overlook just north of the Oregon coast. The ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. I pulled Grandpa's letter from the glove compartment. The edges were already worn from how many times I'd read it. I smiled, then folded it back up. For years, I believed saying yes made me a good son, a good brother, a good person. What I finally learned was much simpler. Real love is given freely. It isn't demanded. It isn't manipulated. And it certainly doesn't arrive with a $4,083.76 restaurant bill attached. The most expensive dinner of my life wasn't the one I refused to pay for. It was the one that showed me exactly who my family had become, and finally gave me the courage to become the person Grandpa always believed I could be.